Filippo Grandi, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, has been forced to slash more than $1 billion in assistance programs, largely because of U.S. foreign aid cuts. I sat down with Mr. Grandi to talk about the refugee crisis. I'm Frank Ucciardo, and you're watching TRT World One-on-One. UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, thank you for joining us here on TRT World.
Thank you very much.
Now, a lot has gone into what is happening in Myanmar, and this dates back to 2017 with military attacks on civilians in Rohingya, and you have recently been there. Tell us more about what's going on.
I've actually been in Bangladesh last time, it was a few months ago, and in Myanmar a couple of weeks ago. So I've seen the situation on both sides of the border. The Rohingya are probably one of the most marginalized, persecuted, discriminated communities in the world. In fact, as you mentioned, 2017 was a tragic year in which violence perpetrated by the Myanmar military forced them to cross the border into Bangladesh, about 800,000 of them. But they had undergone violent situations for decades before. That was probably the worst episode. And since then, on the one hand, we've tried to help the Rohingya refugees from Myanmar in Bangladesh with the support of Bangladesh. On the other hand, we've been trying to see what can be done on the Myanmar side. There is an area called Rakhine, that's where they come from. What can be done in Rakhine to create conditions for people to go back? To make things even more complicated and worse, frankly, in the last 3-4 years, a civil war has erupted in Rakhine between the central authorities, the federal authorities, if you wish, and a third group called the Arakan Army. And this group has been fighting, is now controlling most of that area, but has been as abusive in respect of the Rohingya as the military before. So for the people, return is still very complex, although that is obviously the solution for them, the best solution in the future, but the conditions are not yet there for people to make that difficult choice.
A lot of the refugees have fled to other places. Turkey comes to mind, some 2.6 million, and now they're interested in returning.
Yeah, well, in the bleak picture of the world in which we have 122 million refugees and displaced and so many conflicts, we are here in New York, and this General Assembly high-level week will be full of discussions on crises difficult to resolve. At least there is a glimmer of hope in Syria. Syria, which has produced refugees for a long time, since the beginning of the civil war in 2011, and Turkey for sure has been the country taking the largest number of Syrian refugees. At the peak, they were well over 3 million. Now, many are deciding to go back to Syria. In fact, that figure in Turkey has now been reduced, as you said, to 2.6 million. That's a positive development. My concern is that not enough support is being given to Syria, to the new Syria that has emerged after the revolution in last December. Not enough international support is being given in all the key areas: security, infrastructure, services, and above all, the economy, in order to make these returns sustainable. So this is why I appreciate that the Turkish government has been very much in the forefront of calling for help, has actually provided lots of help inside Syria itself, but it has to be followed more decisively, more substantively by other governments.
I want to pivot back to the Rohingya demographic. What is that like? What makes up that religious-wise, women and children?
If you take the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, there's about 800,000-900,000, if you wish, probably a bit more because some are there from previous, they're residual from previous outflows, the vast majority are women and children. If you take these two categories together, you reach between 75 and 80%. And if you take only one category at a time, there's about half of them are children, half of them are women. So a very high percentage of people that need particular attention and support. And in this situation of scarce funding, this is not easy.
In Cox's Bazar, what is daily life like for women and children and the people that live there?
It's a tough life. People fled in 2017, as you recalled. I remember I was here in New York because it was this time of the year, the General Assembly high-level week, and I cut short my stay here to rush to Bangladesh to witness the arrival of these people. They were fleeing the most horrifying episodes of violence. Rape, women raped, children killed in front of their parents, families separated and abused. And when they fled to Bangladesh, Bangladesh opened the doors, opened the border to take them in and provided an element of security and protection, which was invaluable. Certainly, a large number of people in a small area, in a very poor area, very fragile, even from the climatic point of view. It's a monsoon area, so prone to floods, to landslides. It's very, very difficult. So life there has never been easy. The policy of Bangladesh is that people have to stay in refugee camps. In other countries, Turkey, for example, refugees are allowed to work, are allowed to go out of camps. In Bangladesh, because of the geography, because of the social issues, because of political choices, also different government, refugees have to stay in camps, because the point of Bangladesh is that the solution is for them to go back eventually to Myanmar. And this is where we should invest all the energy and resources. The problem is the situation, as I said, is so difficult there that people have to continue to live in these very crowded camps. Imagine a city built of bamboo huts in the middle of the jungle with 1 million people. That's what the Cox's Bazar camps look like.
Let us look at the continent of Africa. We have conflicts there that seem unabated. Sudan. Tell us about the refugee situation there.
Sudan is probably the largest humanitarian crisis today. Millions and millions of people displaced inside the country by a ferocious conflict that has been raging for the past 2.5 years. And at least 4 million Sudanese have chosen to flee from the country, and they took refuge in neighboring countries which are very, very fragile, like Chad or South Sudan or Egypt or Ethiopia. And the disadvantage among many of this crisis is that it has never been in the headlines. It has always competed, so to speak, it's a bad word, but it's correct, with other higher profile crises, Ukraine, for example, or Gaza. But it is equally terrible for civilians that are impacted by aerial bombings, by militias abusing them, forced recruitment, rape of women, destruction of infrastructure, huge displacement, and lack of resources. You mentioned Myanmar. The humanitarian funding for Myanmar is not very good. It's about 45-50% of the needs. But if you look at Sudan, it's even worse. It's about 20-25% of the needs this year that have been covered. So it's really a crisis that doesn't get the visibility, the attention, and the response that it should have, first in the political sphere to try and stop the war, but also in the humanitarian sphere to help people survive.
Is your agency getting the access it needs?
Not everywhere. There are still many places that are problematic. You must have followed what's happening in El Fasher. This is a city in Darfur, in western Sudan, which is under the control of the armed forces, but it is surrounded by the militias that are fighting against the armed forces in this very brutal civil war. And it has been under siege for months now, with very little assistance going in, and convoys blocked by the different parties. So unfortunately, although the situation has a bit improved compared to a year ago, it is still very hard to get aid to people in need.
Your agency and many UN agencies across the board are being hit financially hard this year, and you yourself has had to suspend, what, more than $1 billion in assistance programs? Tell us about that.
Even more so, because UNHCR in 2024 received about $5 billion from donors, making it one of the largest humanitarian agencies in the world. This year, cuts have affected about $1.5 billion. So it's about a third of the organization that we had to reduce by laying off people, by closing offices, and most seriously by reducing support to refugees, displaced and stateless people. This is very painful. We had to prioritize the most vulnerable. Sometimes when you prioritize the most vulnerable, you means that you have to choose between the very, very vulnerable and the vulnerable. These are terrible choices that our people on the ground have to make.
Well, I guess just in the last year alone, you have quite a shortfall in funding just for this year, right?
And you know, for sure we have a shortfall, but what is striking is that it's not just UNHCR. The entire aid system, food aid, aid for children, aid for health, and other education and other very important priority activities is being reduced across the board. So in the past, maybe one agencies had financial problems, another one could help, but now across the board, we all suffer from these reductions, and it has become difficult to help the people in need.
Filippo Grandi, the High Commissioner for Refugees, thank you for joining us here on TRT World.
Thank you very much. Thank you.